Very good morning to everybody who is logged in to this high-level panel on greening the humanitarian response, challenges and opportunities. I'm Kathy Watson, Chief of Partnerships at World Agroforestry, and I'll be moderating. Welcome to our four esteemed panelists: Jagan Chapagain, Secretary General of the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies; Andrew Harper, Special Advisor on Climate Action at UNHCR; Marie-Pierre Calais, the CEO of ACTED; and Vivi Michaud, Director General of DG ECHO. This event opens the HNPW Climate Crisis Week, and we're going to build on issues that were raised this time last year at the HNPW and are of really critical importance. And what we're going to do is get clear on greening, what is it, and how to reduce the climate environmental footprint of humanitarian aid. Everyone is affected by climate crisis and the degradation of ecosystems, but it's the most vulnerable who have contributed least to it who are the hardest hit. And as the crisis deepens, humanitarian actors, from donors to humanitarian organizations to local volunteers, face a collective responsibility to ensure that what we do does not contribute to further deteriorating environment and heating up the world, and in any way harm the health, well-being, and resilience of the people we serve. So in recent years, this topic has gained visibility and importance, but challenges remain in bringing pilot solutions to scale and fully integrating the environment under the do no harm principles that is at the whole core of humanitarian work. So today we'll be setting the scene. We will also look at how addressing environmental concerns and building environmental resilience are in fact an opportunity to improve the quality and impact of our work. And we'll be doing this together. We have a Slido poll coming up, and we'll also ask you to build a word cloud. So with that review of why we're here, I'm going to introduce the panelists. We have Jagan Chapagain, the Secretary General of International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. He's here representing international organizations. He assumed the role of Secretary General of IFRC in 2020, and he has extensive experience and a broad knowledge of the movement, having begun his career as a volunteer in the Nepal Red Cross and advocating for and representing community voices. He spent more than 20 years with IFRC, working across Europe and Asia, and prior to that, he was also in very senior roles there as well. So Andrew Harper is a special advisor on climate action to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in Geneva, and here he represents as well the UN family. He's responsible for providing strategic guidance, oversight, and expertise to shape UNHCR's response to the climate emergency. And prior to that, he was director of the Division of Program Support and Management and did a huge amount of work on the Syrian crisis in Jordan. One of his achievements was setting up the Zaatari and Azraq refugee camps, and he's also worked on the Iraq situation and the Libyan crisis. And then Marie-Pierre Calais is the CEO of ACTED, which is one of the largest French NGOs. She co-founded it 25 years ago. It has operations in 40 countries, 7,000 staff, and is reaching 20 million beneficiaries. She developed their activities in Afghanistan, Central Asia, and has been involved since then in responding to the main humanitarian crises throughout the world, and has overseen the launch of many tools and initiatives to make humanitarian work more sustainable and inclusive. And finally, Vivi Michaud is the Director General of the Directorate General for the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations. We out here in Africa mostly know that as ECHO, DG ECHO, and it's part of European Commission, and she's here also representing the donor community. She joined the European Commission in 1995 and has held a series of very senior positions. She's been with DG ECHO since January 2020. Prior to that, she was DG of European Commission's Directorate General for Migration, very relevant, and Home Affairs. Between 2015 and 2018, she was the Deputy Secretary General in charge of coordinating the EC's work on migration and security. So That's a tremendous lineup that we've got today. I'm personally very interested in hearing what everybody had to say. I had the honor of chairing Andrew a year ago, and I'd really like to know how the needle has moved on the dial since then. You're all most welcome panelists. I'd now like to take the opportunity to introduce a video about Cox's Bazar, one of the most famous refugee areas in the world. It's in Bangladesh. It's home to nearly 900,000 Rohingya refugees. And it's going to start the discussion which we're going to have today, which is how humanitarian interventions can in fact lead to environmental harm if planning is not thorough and environment aware. So I'd like to ask the tech team to start the video.
এই এরিয়াটা ছিল রিজার্ভ ফরেস্ট। এই রিজার্ভ ফরেস্ট রোহিঙ্গাদের আগমনের প্রেক্ষিতে গভর্নমেন্ট এই এলাকা তাদেরকে বসবাসের উপযোগী করে দেন এবং সেই সময় এখানকার সমস্ত বন এবং এখানকার যে ভৌগোলিক যে অবস্থা ছিল সমস্ত ধ্বংস করে ফেলা হয়। পরবর্তীতে এখানে পরিবেশ নিয়ে কাজ করার জন্য প্রয়োজনীয়তা দেখা দিল। তখন ইউনিসিআরের আর্থিক সহযোগিতায় সেন্টার ফর ন্যাচারাল রিসোর্স স্টাডিজ ক্যাম্পের পাইলটিং হিসাবে ক্যাম্প 4 এবং 4 এক্সটেনশন সিএক্স অফিসের এরিয়াটাকে বেছে নেওয়া করে এখানে পানির ক্যারিং ক্যাপাসিটি বৃদ্ধি করার জন্য এবং আপনাদের এখানে যেন সারা বছর পানি থাকে সেই ধরনের আমরা এখানে রিজার্ভার তৈরি করি এবং আপনার প্রচুর গাছ লাগাই। এই গাছগুলো লাগানোর ফলে যেটা হয়েছে যে এখন গাছগুলো আস্তে বড় হয়ে যাচ্ছে, এগুলো ছায়া দিচ্ছে, এগুলো অক্সিজেন দিচ্ছে। জানেন যে এখানে শেল্টার তৈরি করার জন্য প্রচুর এই এলাকায় পাহাড় ছিল, পাহাড়গুলোকে কেটে সমতল করা করতে হয়েছে। হওয়ার ফলে যখনই বৃষ্টি হচ্ছে তখনই সাবরেসিস্টে পাঠিয়েছে সেটা এই খাল এবং সাব স্ট্রিমগুলো দিয়ে না হইতে চলে যাচ্ছে। কিন্তু কয়েকটা সমস্যা হচ্ছে, একটা হচ্ছে ন্যাচারাল যে রিসোর্স আছে সেটা নষ্ট হচ্ছে, বিশেষ করে মাছ বা অন্যান্য জলজ জীব যেগুলো নষ্ট হচ্ছে সলিড এবং লিকুইড স্টোরেজের কারণে। পাশাপাশি আপনার সিল্টেড হয়ে যাচ্ছে, হয়ে যাওয়ার ফলে এখানে আপনার ফসল আবাদ যেগুলো করতো সেই ফসলগুলো আবাদ করতে পারছে। এখানে যে সেক্টরগুলো আমরা কাজ করি আমরা পরিবেশের একটা পার্ট, খুবই ক্ষুদ্র একটা পার্ট আমরা এখানে কাজ করি, কিন্তু বৃহৎ অ্যাক্টিভিটিগুলো কিন্তু হচ্ছে যে শেল্টার, লাইব্রেরিতে কাজ হচ্ছে, এখানে কাজ হচ্ছে, এডুকেশনে কাজ হচ্ছে। আমার মনে হচ্ছে যে এখানে সবার ভিতরে একটা আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ডিং আসা দরকার, একটা ইউনিক একটা প্ল্যাটফর্ম আসা দরকার। তো যারা আমরা কাজ করতেছি তারা যে কাজগুলো আমরা করতেছি ইতিমধ্যে সেগুলো আসলে একটা ভালো পজিটিভ ইম্প্যাক্ট করেছে। জানেন যে সবুজায়ন যেটা হয়েছে ক্যাম্পে, এটি কিন্তু পরিবেশের একটা পার্ট। বিভিন্ন জায়গাতে রিজার্ভার তৈরি করা হয়েছে, এটি একটা পরিবেশের পার্ট। পরিবেশটাকে আবার আগের মতো পুনরুদ্ধার করা দরকার, যেটির ইতিমধ্যে
রোড জানা বা রাস্তা, ড্রেন অনেক কিছু ঠিকঠাক অল্প আসছিল, আর বেশি জামা গাছ আসছিল, গাছ গুছানো আসছিল। এখন গাছ গুছলা রইয়ে রাস্তা হইয়ে বা ড্রেন অকল হইয়ে আগে মানে ড্রেনের ব্যবস্থা আসছিল, এখন বহুত বেশি ব্যবধান হয়ে ড্রেন অকল আসছিল মানে গন্ধ উঠিত। এখন ড্রেন অকল যখন বাড়া করে দিয়ে এখন গন্ধ করে না রোডের এখন আরো নয়া নিয়ে আসি আর ফসল আমাদের বিজ্ঞান হইতাম যদি ফাইন্যান্স ফেলা গেছে ব্যক্তি কারণ আসছিল। এর পরে আর আইন যখন মাস মাস বা করে আর করে ডাস্টবিন দিয়ে তো ডাস্টবিনের মধ্যে ফেলাই কতই তারা লই না এনজিও করলে নিউজ করে যায় তারা করে আর করে আসেন তারা মানে তারা ইয়ার আগে বাসন লই না সেন্টার সাইড ওয়াল দিয়ে।
Environmental degradation, deforestation, desertification and pollution pose an existential threat to the most vulnerable populations. With less means to adapt and mitigate against the impacts of climate change, the world's poorest and most marginalized communities will be the hardest hit by the environmental crisis. In this context, humanitarian actors should come together to adopt ambitious and innovative measures to reduce the increasingly negative impact of climate change by greening their operations. It is our collective responsibility to take the necessary measures to reduce the climate and environmental footprint at both organizational and operational level, identify local and global solutions to climate change, focusing on the most vulnerable, and upscale the programming related to fighting climate change and preserving the environment.
Thanks very much. That was a very revealing video that showed some problems. We know they've had landslides there as well, but also showed a lot of solutions like riparian planting, tree planting, use of bamboo, solar. So that's great. It's a really good start off. Now I'd like to turn to IFRC's Jagan and ask him the following question. Why has greening, the humanitarian response, become such an important issue over the past years?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to some of you. Really great to be here. That was a great video, and I think it sets the scene for the conversation this morning. Maybe I will focus on three things, why it's become so important. The first is we have seen all the data and the statistics that the crisis had just gotten worse over the years, despite all the discussions we had, summits we had, commitments we have made, guidelines we have developed, policies we have developed. I think the climate and environmental crisis has just gotten worse. It has increased to such a scale that the humanitarian community faces a wake-up call about the impact of our own response on the current crisis. So what we are contributing ourselves into this crisis, I think this has become very, very serious. Some of the studies we did, as we see the old disaster report we published last year called Come Heat or High Water, found that 97.6 million people were affected by disasters in 2019. The number of disasters triggered by extreme weather and climate-related events has also risen almost 35% since the 1990s. And also the other study we did, our cost of doing nothing report, it showed that actually by 2050, the people needing international humanitarian assistance will double to 200 million people. So these are just some of the examples to show that the crisis has just gotten worse. And on top of that, of course, the climate and environmental crisis affects the most vulnerable people disproportionately. So the people who are already living in a difficult living environment, the world's poorest, the marginalized, and the most exposed are the ones experiencing the biggest impact of the climate crisis. So this is the sort of the first reason why. The second, we can say it's probably not enough or lack of ownership of our own responsibility by the humanitarian community. We must radically and urgently change our ways of working. This includes taking responsibility for how we may contribute to the causes of the climate and environmental crisis or worsen their impact. This means we have to green our humanitarian response. And I know the greening the humanitarian response applies very much the do no harm principle, but I would like us to go one step further. I think doing no harm is, in my view, not enough. We have to proactively do good. And some of the examples given on the video from Cox's Bazar is actually promoting the concept of do good. So while we continue to practice the do no harm principle, we have to do good. We have to be more proactive, and we have to have our processes, our systems, our action that proactively promotes the greening of our response. So not only do no harm, but do good. I think that's very, very important to bring that proactivity. And I think finally, maybe we still lack of collective ambition as a humanitarian sector. Of course, there have been summits and summit declarations, and I know many individual organizations have developed their own ambition, but should we not come together as a humanitarian sector? And we recognize the need to work more collaboratively and more collectively in greening our operations together. And I think this is a very, very important element. And I think one of the things we have practiced to do last year, working, of course, with the UN system, many NGOs and other organizations, to develop a climate and environmental charter for humanitarian organizations. I think this is sort of getting finalized. And what we believe is such a charter would help us come together to ensure that collective and collaborative response to this crisis. This charter, we hope that can unite humanitarian organizations together in a collective ambition to do more, do better together in tackling the climate and environmental crisis. So in summary, I think the three things here. Firstly, the climate has just gotten worse. The climate and environmental crisis has just gotten worse. Second is, I think there is not enough ownership of our own responsibility, the impact of our own actions, so we have to act on that. And probably third one is lack of collective ambition in the humanitarian sector. So I see these three as the main reasons why we have to scale up greening our response. Over to you.
Fantastic, Jagan. I've got that down very clearly. That was crystal clear. Andrew of UNHCR, what do we need to do to better integrate, anchor, and mainstream the greening agenda within the humanitarian ecosystem?
Okay, and thanks. And I can only agree with Jagan and the introduction so far. What we have to do is to not be coming into it as we know everything, and seeing that this is some unexpected situation, and we're rolling in with our trucks and our airplanes, and we're saying, okay, we're going to save the day. We're not going to save the day. The situation is getting worse, and what science is telling us is that we need to anticipate that countries which are already on the front lines of the climate emergency are going to even struggle more. And this is not just a UNHCR issue. This is, as Jagan was saying, everyone who's interested in the well-being of populations. The vulnerable are going to be unfortunately made more vulnerable. So how can we be anticipatory in our approach and not necessarily just approach it from a humanitarian angle? So we need to be looking at a cross pillar. We need to be seeing the humanitarian elements, the development elements, the peace building and security elements, the humanitarian elements, and the human rights side of the equation. But it has to be linked very much into what is it the communities on the ground need, and how does this fit in with national adaptation plans. So we've never been in a situation like we're in now that we can actually almost pinpoint where the biggest challenges will be in the future. So certainly we all need to become greener. Every decision needs to be seen through an environmental green lens. And we should all be holding ourselves accountable. IFRC should be holding the UN agencies accountable. The NGOs should be holding IFRC accountable. We should be holding the donors accountable, because maintaining the approach that we've had for the last 100-odd years is not going to work for the next 100 years. We have to be much more ambitious, as Jagan has said. But we also need to have a focus on impact. Kathy, you're mentioning, what have we achieved in the last year? We should be asking each one of us, what are we going to achieve over the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and reverting back to the communities on the ground and saying, are you satisfied with that? And donors should be saying, what have we achieved for the financing that we've provided? So lots of things to be done. And just the fact that Jagan's been saying about quite rightly about the Humanitarian Charter, we can sign off on that. But the next issue, and the biggest issue, is making a difference on the ground. There's a lot of focus on process. There's a lot of focus on talks and discussions. But are we prepared to pay more, for instance, to achieve a better environmental outcome? Are we willing to say that we are actually accountable for improving the well-being of the people on the ground rather than just keeping them alive? Over. Thank you.
That's great. Improve the well-being of the people on the ground rather than just keep them alive, and more focus on impact. Very, very good. So Marie-Pierre Calais, what are NGOs which are often providing the last mile delivery of humanitarian aid to the world's poorest and most marginalized communities, who are the hardest hit by the effects of the climate change, doing on greening their response? So what are the NGOs doing, and what are the main challenges that they're facing?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yes, greening humanitarian aid for NGO is indeed very challenging, like for everybody. But on one hand, everybody agrees that this is an imperative. On the other hand, we should all recognize that it is easier said than done, especially if we want to avoid the greenwashing. At the field level, reaching the last kilometer is by definition, de facto, the duty of the NGO, and is by definition carbon footprint intensive. Much more intensive than sitting beside a desk, in the front of a laptop in a paperless office somewhere in the world, exactly my situation while I'm speaking to you today. In addition of reaching the last kilometer, humanitarian intervention is by essence as fast as possible actually in many cases immediate. In these moments, when lives are in danger, greening is currently a plus, but not a must. The first point to highlight is to recognize that this is a long process. For us, we started in 2018, 3 years ago, and from the beginning, we planned a 5 to 6 years process to actually fully green the organization and the intervention, with an ultimate aim to decrease by 50% our carbon footprint. First of all, I believe that there is a need to set up a carbon footprint baseline that includes all types of greenhouse gas emission, Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. The Scope 3 being the programs, operation of the program, the activity in the field. It is a fairly long process to go from Scope 1 to Scope 3. However, this is the only way to be in a position to analyze fully and honestly the impact of every single field office as well as every single operation. There is obviously a need to harmonize the 3 scopes and to take a collective commitment to launch a process that would allow to calculate the collective impact of the humanitarian intervention. For us, it took us almost 18 months to reach this point where we believe we have a rather honest understanding of what is the global footprint affected, from its HQ to the smallest action we have in the most remote place, whatever the difficulty to implement our action are. The second point, in parallel, has been and is still to get a full ownership of all our teams, international and above all, national staff from country director to distribution officer, as well as of our national partner, to remind them daily that this process ultimately is in their hands and should become their pride. One of the main risks in this greening process is that additional process is seen as an additional compliance requirement coming from the HQ organization and the donors, and ultimately perceived as an additional administrative and bureaucratic burden. This in a context that you all know, wherever increasing requests from compliance lead to another increasing administrative burden for our team in the field. A tick-the-box policy is, at the field levels, the worst way to get the full ownership from our teams, keeping in mind that ultimately we wish this message to reach and being owned by our beneficiary. This is the ultimate goal. So at the global level, the beneficiary have been the least responsible for gas emission, and often they have been the first victim of the climate change. And unfortunately, in their situation, when their life is in danger, greening is the least of their priority. Regular reporting on 100+ metric regarding our greenhouse gas emission, working with our supplier on greening the supply chain, or putting in place a green fleet management system looks very nice. In reality, when supplies can only be provided to the most needy, notably the displaced and the refugees using trucks and diesel, whose only option to survive is to overuse the local resources, things cannot be changed in a minute. This being said, once our carbon footprint is fully clarified, we set priority, 1 for our offices, B for our logistics and procurement, C for our programs. It will be too long now to list all the key indicators we have set and have continuously tried to improve and adapt over the last 3 years. Actually, in a nutshell, most of them are really common sense. But we also need to recognize that this process is literally a paradigm change, a paradigm shift. Instead of thinking global and acting local, there is a need to act global and to think locally. Again, easier said than done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie-Pierre. And I really appreciate your candor in saying that last mile intervention is very carbon intensive And this can be an additional burden, but we really, really have to do this. So thank you very much. That was really great and very granular about what it's like to be in the field. Good. So our next question is to Vivi. Mishu, having heard these salient points, what can donors do to support the greening of the humanitarian responses they fund? And how can donors' collective influence be better leveraged? So a focus on donors.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning from my side. And thank you for the invitation. Well, a lot have been said what we need to get out of our actions about collective responsibility, about ambition, about determination, about accountability, and more importantly, about supporting the people in need by applying all these principles that we said before. Now, by delivering aid, I think Anne-Pierre said it, Marie-Pierre said it, by delivering aid, which is emergency, we recognize, and we should recognize, that we should also be addressing the environmental impact of all types of crises. Many of them are protracted. By delivering this aid, we must not deteriorate the environment people live in and on which they rely on for their livelihoods and well-being. So we should be thinking, even in emergencies, how we can not even more deteriorate this environment that we are acting on. You said it, Kathleen, that since 2007, yes, the European Consensus on Humanitarian Aid already recognized the do not harm principle. And this guides our job. However, we are 2021, and I think we are now really having these indicators, and we are thinking collectively how we cannot do harm. It is these days that we all discuss about climate. It is these days that we see how we could work together and in a coordinated way to address the issues that are put on the table. And the European Commission, since 2014, is supporting the Joint United Nations Environmental Programme, OCHA, which address this impact of emergencies. And we even support EU environmental expertise to join environmental unit assessment missions. As we now speak this day, 2 EU experts, a volcanologist and a waste management expert, are supporting the joint environmental unit assessment mission following the eruption of La Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. A few months ago, we communicated to our partners our approach, how we will reduce the environmental impact of EU funding humanitarian aid operations. And I heard it already, how our own staff behavior and offices will change. We realized that is a long process, but we cannot wait longer. Our ideas and principles and policy lines are in the communication that we published on the 10th of March, which, if you notice the title, speaks about new challenges, same principles. So in our communication that we published, we have put it down that how we will apply a mainstreaming approach to all environmental issues. That means that environmental impacts should be mitigated across projects, programs, and the organizations themselves to the extent possible. We will not be funding standalone green projects as we believe this will not bring a sustainability to scale. Although we will support capacity building efforts of our partners, and I heard already said that we should act now locally as well. To this end, we have decided to adopt a phased approach. I said already, nothing is done from day 1 to day 2. We realize that although some partners are quite advanced, not everyone, including our own department, have the capacity to address everything of this impact immediately and fully. We also see progress as a collaborative process, rather than imposing this for a top-down change, and only looks good on a paper that we will publish or it will be published. A very important element is also the donor coordination, as we all fund the same implementing organizations at the end of the day. Therefore, at the very least, must avoid developing policies and requirements that contradict each other. At best, we would have coordinated approach and requirements. We have so much to learn from each other. And I don't speak only about donors, I speak about all of us. And that is why it is very important for all of us to be present in these discussions, and even us as Commission lead certain of them. For example, we are organizing a donor meeting on greening in a few days as part of the Humanitarian Networks and Partnership Week. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Vivi. That was absolutely great. Thank you for sending a volcanologist to St. Vincent Island. And thanks for making clear that you're not going to fund standalone greening projects, but you're very interested in coordination and capacity development. Excellent presentations that set us off to a very good start. So we'd now like to get insights from the audience, and we're going to have a live poll. So get your devices out, and we'd like to ask you to select one of 6 statements that are featured on the screen. And the question is, what is the main thing that would help us move forward on making environmentally sustainable humanitarian efforts, interventions, the norm? What's the main thing to make it the norm? So you need to go to Mentimeter, or actually it's www.menti.com on your computer or phone, and you have to type in the following code. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I'll read it to you. So go to www.menti.com, MENTI, on your device, and type in 52039682. 52039682. And I understand we have 200 people in the audience, so we're really interested in you, the audience, and what you think about how do we make this the norm. 52039682. Yeah, then you'll be able to vote, and please click the submit button at the bottom of the page that you'll be seeing. I hope that's working. Okay, so it looks like we've got the bars have stopped jumping around. The font is extremely small, but it looks like minimum environmental standards is the main thing. 29% of you have selected that. So that's clearly critically important. Number 2 is dedicated funding with 22%. And then 20% comes in at increased awareness of all humanitarian actors on environmental impacts. And then the other 3, also important, more technical capacity support, investing in research and innovation, and championing by sector management of humanitarian organizations, all come in at about 10%. But it's a good spread. But clearly we need those minimum environmental standards, and perhaps we could be addressing them as we discuss further. And we do need, Vivi, we do need those dedicated funds. Those are very, very critical. So I think that's very interesting. That's a very good, gives a good feel of what you, the audience, the 200 people in the audience actually feel about this. So that's very, very good. Now, I'd like to turn back to the audiences, and we're going to start with Jagan again. Keeping in mind these responses from the audience, what do we need to do to scale up greening the humanitarian response and to make it the norm? And what opportunities can we create to bridge these gaps? So basically, we're asking you to respond to what you saw on the screen. Yeah, which was number 1 was the minimal environmental standards. Number 2 is funding. So we could start there, Jagan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, on the minimum standards, and as I mentioned in my first answering to your first question, we talk about the charter. So I was a bit relieved to get that highest number of people highlighting on the minimum standards. And the climate and environmental charter is exactly trying to do that, but in a collaborative manner. Rather than individual organizations developing their own standards, we are trying to develop in a collective manner, because the real change will happen only if we are working in a collective manner. So I think I absolutely agree with the response that came from the audience. But let me share with you maybe the 3 things that we probably need to do. I mean, really to start is we just need to act on the promises made. I think Andrew talked about before on action, and I fully agree with him. There have been many promises made, the commitment made, but we just need to focus now on acting and turning those commitments and the policy statements and political statements really into action on the ground to make a difference in people's lives. That's basically where we have to shift our focus from now on if we really want to make a difference before it is too late. So the first point I want to say is really innovation and action. We really need to get innovative approaches to action. And once we have done that, we have to scale up those good practices. A lot of times we keep on having pilots and pilots and pilots. We have to move away from constant piloting to we innovate in an action, and we scale up those good practices. And many organizations, I'm sure you have your examples to share. One of the examples is we started with the video from Cox's Bazar. One thing we did from our organization was really investing on a new and greener methods to deal with the fecal waste collected in Cox's Bazar. Almost 1 million people living in a very congested environment. Imagine the amount of fecal waste that was produced and how to manage that. And those of you who have visited Cox's Bazar can see it's extremely difficult. So we had a simple, innovative, costed less than $50,000 to put something in place in Cox's Bazar, which could be managed locally very well, and basically turn those fecal waste into a water which actually could be used for gardening. Simple investment in innovation could change a huge challenge that existed in Cox's Bazar to something positive. The second thing is adopting a whole of house approach, meaning although the championing by the leadership came low on the poll, but I absolutely believe that the leadership have to set the tone. And the leaders have to champion this issue. And I think we really have to have the whole approach. I think the colleagues from ACTED talk about having the ownership from the distributor on the ground to the head of the country to the leadership sitting in the capital. Everybody have to own the issue, but the championship must come from the leadership and the senior managers. And the third point I would like to highlight is, I think, collaborate, share, support, and learn from each other. I think that's so important, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to compete, because this is a crisis so big. The climate and environmental crisis is so big. We don't need to compete for space. There is enough for everybody, every humanitarian organization. So collaborating, sharing, supporting, and learning from each other, and really then transforming some of this learning to a collective action on the ground. So these three things I would see as the most important thing. First is innovation in action and scale up. Second thing is really adopt a whole of house approach, meaning that the organizations collectively wants it, but championed by the senior leaders. And then finally, collaborating, sharing, supporting, and learning from each other. So these would be my input on this point. Over to you.
Yeah, Jagan, thank you very much. And thanks for saying that with $50,000, you managed to convert fecal waste into water. And that's something you can scale up. It doesn't have to be a pilot anymore, does it? So Andrew, what is your thoughts here? Thanks very much.
Well, I think, again, I don't want to take the easy option out, but sort of agreeing with everything that Jagan just mentioned, but also saying that all the elements that were on the poll need to be, like, they're part of the approach. Like, we do need more dedicated funding. We need more. The field needs technical capacity, because it doesn't matter what organization you're working for. If you go out to the field, they say, oh my God, we've just got so many issues coming on, whether it be in West Africa or or Central America. So we can't expect the field to be able to just add another issue. So we need to build up that capacity. One of the great things is that there is an increasing understanding of the need to trust science, looking at research and innovation, but we don't all have to do it. What we have to understand is looking at existing science and listening to what it tells us, and we look at what are the collective outcomes that we as humanitarians or even the development sector need to invest in, and that we don't compete with each other, as Jagan was saying. Like, if you're looking at the Sahel, almost every government in Europe and elsewhere are investing in the Sahel, but they're often doing it in a very much, we're the ones who are going to be taking the lead. You can't be doing that. You need to be looking at what does the region need, and to trust the region and support the region. So that local capacity is particularly important. We also have to understand that humanitarians are probably not the best for implementing large-scale projects. So if we are looking at impact, if we are looking at immediacy, if we're looking at scale, which we have to be, let's partner with the professionals and let's identify who they are. And often it is the various ministries within the country, or it could be the private sector. But let's not get in the way of the people who can actually implement greening solutions, rather than planting 100 hectares or looking to rejuvenate the soil of 1,000 hectares. We've got to be looking almost in the millions to make the difference that's required. Collective ownership, as has been also raised, it's not just humanitarians. The collective ownership for improving the well-being of populations on the ground, it's not humanitarians, it's not only the development agencies, it's not only the government, it's everyone. We're all in this together. So focusing almost on understanding where the biggest challenges will be, both now and in 5 years, 10 years time, and looking about how we can reduce the future vulnerabilities and who is in the best position to implement those actions. We're all committed to existing principles, enhancing those principles, but it's the impact on the ground that we really need to scale up, and we really need to scale it up now.
Great, thank you very much, Andrew. And what I took away is, one of the takeaways is trust science, trust the region, trust local capacity, and partner with professionals. That's very, very, very good. So now we turn to Marie-Pierre of ACTED.
Thank you. Yes, first of all, I would like to come back on the terms of norm. We need to be careful. In the last years, we have seen a significant attempt of restriction to access of humanitarian aid, and norms are usually set up by people working behind their desk with a laptop in a paperless office, and we can easily end up in additional restriction to access. So all of us do not want to end up in a situation where an action is not undertaken because of its heavy cost on the carbon emission in order to comply with whatever norm. By definition, as I said, a humanitarian activity with non-existing infrastructure destroyed one, notably in a war country, and the need to act immediately are heavy in carbon emission. This is, to my mind, a very important point to be said and to be remembered by all of us and by all the decision makers. I very much prefer the term of relevant and positive framework rather than norm to be agreed together with incentive that can easily, because the norm can be easily be perceived as punitive and might have counterproductive effect. The humanitarian sector is not the car-making sector where norms can be easily defined and measured, of course, if the control measures are quite honest. This being said, if we want to gradually scale up the greening of the humanitarian response, there are probably three directions to consider. The first one is how to decrease our carbon emission. I think it's clear. The second one is how to take into account and to enhance our carbon compensation. And the third one is how to integrate the greening in the coordination mechanism. First of all, obviously the question of measuring the carbon footprint needs to be streamlined, standardized, and systematized. We need to agree on a common standard and processes, notably for the scope 3, the programming one. According to our organizational carbon footprint, the highest amount, over 80% of the emission and environmental impact, comes from the front office operation, meaning our program, namely the purchase of humanitarian goods and services, upstream transportation and distribution. In terms of carbon emission, we believe that incentives are needed, including the financial one for us, as well as through us for our national partners, which are notoriously under-equipped to tackle this challenge. Secondly, the question of the compensation. The obvious and easier first point is to pass an agreement with specialized actors that can compensate our flight footprint. I think something most of them already do. It's quite the easiest point. But as important and more important, in addition, we could gradually enlarge the scope of the offsetting agreement, remembering that this is coming with a significant cost. In parallel, it is important as well to facilitate the accreditation of carbon footprint offsetting activity in our intervention. Currently, accreditation can only be made project by project, a process fairly expensive and uneasy to implement when we speak about relatively short-term projects, especially during the first phase of the humanitarian response after a crisis. All NGOs and the humanitarian sector should together, basically, need to be able to work on this issue to demonstrate our impact on compensating carbon emission by our activity. Finally, the question needs to be integrated gradually in some of the coordination mechanism level, keeping in mind that we need to be careful again on people sitting in their desk in front of a laptop in a paperless office that should not create white elephant, easy to measure for them and much less easy to implement in the real life at the last kilometer. For example, at the YASC level, Interagency Standing Committee, we could formalize a reference group for environment and humanitarian action, as it was, I think, already proposed a few years back. but as far as I remember, I know was not really taken forward. Such a reference group under the IAS could follow activity in the field of environmental mainstreaming, sharing, experience, and knowledge, for example. Another point, for example, at the HCT level, humanitarian country team, greening the humanitarian response could be a standing agenda item during the meeting and have a country-level thematic working group on this topic feeding into the HRP and HCT process. Again, this needs to be a gradual process. That is by no way another way to restrict the humanitarian access for the more hard-to-reach communities. It is fairly easy for large agencies to green their HQ and their capital office in the field. It is mainly an issue of financial means. Greening the last kilometer will need more means and more time, 2 points the NGO are already struggling with. Altogether, in addition to this mechanism and keeping in mind the cost and difficulty to green the last kilometer, NGO need to increasingly plug in with innovation coming from outside the humanitarian sector. Thank you.
Marie-Pierre, thank you very much for not exactly pushing back against the word norms or norm, but just saying a little skeptically that we have to be very careful about in anything that potentially could increase restrictions. And thank you also for recognizing that, offsetting and compensating carbon is a really complicated process. I've tried to do that with some of our agroforestry projects. It's really expensive to register your project with the carbon verification schemes. So thank you very, very much. And Vivi, could we now have you?
Well, when I start listening, Jagan, I heard something that it was music in my ears, even if funding was second in the poll. When then we went through the other interventions, I understand that there are still certain issues that we need to address, both from partners and donors. So what I want to express to you today is that I don't believe that change is necessarily conditional to more funding or more research. I think that we have already solutions developed, and we need at one stage step up and going farther than piloting. So we need to start planning our interventions, to my view, differently. We need to integrate environmental considerations from the beginning of a project. We need to work together for projects, cross-cutting. And we need to start even before, from earlier, already in the humanitarian response plans from our side. By being more proactive than reactive, especially at the start of new crises and emergencies, we could and we can prevent avoidable issues later on. For example, the plastic pollution we saw during the video earlier, or deforestation due to lack of energy sources. At the same time, it's true that we as donors need to look at projects and interventions differently as well, and start favorable evaluating interventions that are more green. I will give you an example. The issue of energy access for our beneficiaries is still too often overlooked as part of food and shelter interventions, leading to deforestation as beneficiaries need to meet their energy needs by seeking firewood. Of course, nothing can happen immediately. It requires building up capacity of our local and partners and their own staff, as also our own staff. We need training, and awareness was in the results, the third one, I think, valued by the audience participating. We know that the funds is tight in more and more because the needs are more and more increased, and in particular, COVID has shown how big these needs are, and therefore, we need to think how we can work from our side as leveraging the humanitarian development peace nexus to promote a more long-term solutions for humanitarian emergencies, including large investments in renewable energy infrastructure, for example. We need to look partnerships with private sector in order to see how we can increase the gap of the funding that we see. And of course, as the Commission and DG ECHO, we are tapping into the EU's large research and innovation budget, the Horizon Europe. So what I say with that is that we already see and work for innovation through the projects we have, supporting innovation of green humanitarian solution, like in the area of waste management and overpackaging. So yes, the points raised in the poll are absolutely valid, and we need to work, but we need also to achieve results on the ground. And this, it cannot be done only by not working with a forward-looking vision and working only on what is coming only yesterday. We need to work in a forward-looking plan together. We need to address emergencies, but we need to look at them in a way to anticipate future needs and, of course, what we discussed today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vivi. That was really great. Integrate the environment from the beginning of a response and start earlier in the response. Yes, very, very good. We're now going to turn again to the audience. I wish I could see you out there, maybe next year. We want to create a word cloud of what you've taken away from today. So just write one or two words that capture your main takeaway from the session, just one or two. And again, you've got to go to menti.com and that you can see the code up there. I'm pleased about that. So 7916232834, and please click submit on the bottom of the screen when you're done. This will take a minute or so we can all take a breath. Thank you very much, panelists. And we're going to reverse the order and we're going to have the women starting the final wrap-up. So we're going to have 2 minutes when we're all done on the word cloud. So let's see what comes up. We want to see the words start appearing on the screen. Okay, so it looks like it's stabilized there. No more words are being added. Partnership, collective responsibility, coordination. Those are very, very salient. But there's also think local, act global, improve well-being, better planning, impact, anticipate impact, like Andrew said, Sustainable planning takes time, like Marie-Pierre said, very minimum standard. Thank you for saying this has been inspiring. That's a little word hanging off down there at the bottom. I also think it's been inspiring. Ownership, that's been a big theme coming up. We have to take ownership of any damage we might cause and also of all the potential things we can be doing. Big challenge. Yeah, it's going to be a big challenge. Let's take steps. Again, standards, easier said than done, and let's have a united vision. I think this is very, very good. We can probably make a poster of this. So I hope everybody's seen it. And I'm going to go on now because we're coming to the end of our time. We've got 15 minutes left. And I'd actually like to ask Marie-Pierre to say, if you had a magic wand, or if there was anything that you could do, what solution would you use to bring about to make humanitarian action more sustainable? What would be the one thing, the magic wand that you would wave?
Thank you. First of all, if I had a magic wand, I would make this terrible pandemic to disappear. At least at my very, very, very selfish level, I will be able to get a coffee in Paris, and it will be great. No, more seriously, if the potential of my magic wand is only restricted to how make humanitarian action sustainable, I would like every human being to realize that since we cannot change our planet, we need to change our world. We need definitely a world zero carbon, zero exclusion, zero poverty, as quick as possible and fast as possible. The 3-0 world should, I think, be impregnated by the humanitarian value, currently focusing on the most needy, and this can be a powerful tool to inspire all. The emergency is not anymore only for the most needy, it is for the entire mankind. Humanitarians should not only focus their attention to their own activities, but to the role model of their approach, their exemplarity, which can contribute to the convergence of all actors, including individuals, private sector, public sector, social sector, and so on. I strongly believe that this convergence can incorporate at the heart of our main value. In French, I would say that we should go from humanitaire, T-A-I-R-E, to humanitaire, T-E-R-R-E. For a non-French speaker, I would propose the neologism humanitaire. For those of you who want to know more, I don't know if you know, but we organize each year a convergence forum, a World Convergence Forum in Paris. This year it will be on the 2nd and the 3rd of September. It will be the 13th edition, and now it's extended to some country. But Convergence, it's an initiative which has been initially set up by ACTED, a humanitarian organization, but which is now joined by hundreds of partners of all type, all kind, and attended by thousands of people to discuss how the convergence by all actors working on silo around the zero carbon, zero poverty, and zero exclusion can make together the difference. And your contribution will be most welcome. To come back narrowly on the question, I would like to say that above the many acronyms I have seen since I became humanitarian, LLRD, Linking Relief, Rehabilitation and Development, BBB, Building Back Better, Nexus, I strongly believe that a larger convergence of all actors around our value will be the main way forward for us to be more sustainable and impacting. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Pierre. I've actually never heard of the 3-0 world, zero carbon, zero exclusion, zero poverty. That's something I'm going to start Googling. Very, very good. Thank you for your intervention. Vivi, can you speak up now about what you would do with your magic wand to make everything a bit more sustainable?
Well, I don't believe in magic, first of all. I believe in working together and try to find the appropriate way to have, as Marie-Pierre, probably the 3-0 world and planet. We need to have it we need to find the appropriate methods and the appropriate tools to arrive there. So if from my side, I would add on this convergence, it's of course a word that also brings to me a lot of attention. But what I would like to have, I would like to have a tool, automatic tool, that it will count all of this into let's say an Excel, and tell me, this is what you have to do in order to deliver this. But can this happen? No. So I think that we should work together. We should work together to make assessments, environmental assessment. We should together work to make our difference on the ground. I think it was said before by Andrew. And we need to continue speaking between us, have a dialogue between us, donors and partners, and facing the challenges. I said it in the beginning, now we cannot go backward. We have to go forward, and the additional challenges we face in the humanitarian world make our life possibly more difficult, but make our life also more challenging in order to be delivered. And I hope with you, and in this, as it was in this panel, we will remain always open to discuss the challenges and to find solutions.
Thank you very, very much. Vivi, that was really excellent. And you don't believe in magic. I don't believe in magic either, but you believe in working together. And thank you very much. And donor and partner dialogue. Excellent. So Andrew, could you go next? We're reversing the order.
Okay, no, thank you very much. We almost need to have a different elements of time travel here. Like, I think the situation is that the urgency is still not being appreciated by a lot of the decision makers, with the exception, if you're on the front line, if you talk to representatives of the Marshall Islands, or if you talk to people coming from the Sahel, or even in Mozambique, they get it. What is not being grasped by a lot of us is that we've got no time to waste. And so if I had a magic wand, it'd be a realization of all the decision makers that all these elements cannot wait. We need to be looking at things at scale. We need to be implementing now. We don't have time for pilots. We have to have a look at collaborative efforts. We need to be looking at collective outcomes. So the magic wand would be everyone who is invested here, whether it be the donors, the international organization, the NGOs, working at country level, regional level, developing a plan of action, which would be ready by the end of this year, breaking it down by development, by environment, by human rights standards, and looking to implement that. Like we've got no choice. Again, the science is there. Global warming is baked in. The world is only going to get warmer. The next time that we have a video from Cox's Bazar wouldn't have been hit by a cyclone. Like we're basically playing Russian roulette with people's lives, and we're focusing on process. We don't have time to be keeping to do this. We have to focus on the populations on the ground and making sure that each one of us are accountable for the choices that we're making. Over.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So you're really #no more time. We cannot wait. Global warming is baked in, and the urgency has to be grasped by people like us, because the people on the ground are really, really vulnerable. So Jagan, please, could you take the last one?
Thank you so much. It's always nice to be the last one, so you could get all the ideas. No, I'm a bit like Vivi. Unfortunately, there is no magic wand here. It will require hard work, sweat, and tears. Everybody will have to work very, very hard to address this issue. And we really have to stop making excuses that this cannot be done. This is too difficult. There is no money. This is there. We have to stop making excuses. There is not a quick solution. There is not a short-time solution. But if we continue to make excuses, the change will not come. So while we recognize that this requires longer-term action, the change has to start from now, and let's stop making excuses. And I will say maybe 4 types of changes. One is change in the mindset. I think we need to change our mindset, just not only talking about do no harm, but proactively doing good too at the same time. We have to start changing this mindset of building back better. Building back better is not good enough. We have to start building forward future. We have to build for the future, not for the past. So we have to change that mindset very, very significantly. A number of you said already, we have to trust the science. Now, the second change is change in our action. So we have to move from piloting to scaling up action. So this constant piloting, and also I think Vivi is here as a donor, please stop funding pilots. We have zillions of pilots which do not make much impact, but we waste so much money and time and resources. We have to get to scale. The third is change in collaboration. And I think this came very much also in the Mentimeter. We have to move from individualism to a collective working together. The problem is big enough. And finally, change in funding. I know if I'm in Vivi's place, probably you receive hundreds of requests for funding for climate separately, for this separately, for this separately. We must have much climate smart financing, meaning that the money that goes on development funding can be climate smart. Money that goes to buying blankets and tents can be climate smart. So the resources, the funding that is put on our humanitarian development, climate action must be invested in a smart manner. If we do that, we will not have problem with the funding. So these are the 4 changes I would like to suggest to make a real difference. Unfortunately, I could not say a magic wand.
Thank you very much, Jagan. I'm going to be tweeting and stop making excuses is what I'm going to put about you. So we need mindset change, building for the future, not just building back. And we don't want lots of little pilots, and we need to move from individualism to collectivism. So we've only got 2 minutes left. I'd like to thank all the panelists. And once again, I wish I was staring out over the whole audience. But thank you for all being here. I really sense a huge paradigm shift from last year and from 2019 when I was also at HNPW. There's no time to waste. The problem is recognized. We're all on it. And we're going to do it. And this time next year, we're going to come back with the charter and a whole lot more. So thank you very, very much. And I just want to say, we've got a big week coming up. This is just the beginning. We've got this afternoon, we have a session on This Changes Everything, Climate Catastrophes and Humanitarian Action. Please sign up for that. And then tomorrow we have a session on climate crisis. What do we need to know to improve response to the unknown future? I think we've all learned a lot from each other today. And there's also going to be sessions on bringing clean energy to scale, making humanitarian relief items, the blankets that Jagan was talking about, and packaging more sustainable, greening, shelter and logistics, nature-based solutions, which is what my organization works on for resilience. And then there's going to be a donor-only meeting to discuss common goals. And I really wish you all the best in that meeting. And look forward to seeing you at more events this week. It's been an absolute pleasure to be the moderator. Thank you so much for all of what you do, all of you in the audience, but also the 4 panelists, because you're not just talking heads, you're really like got your boots on the ground and you're doing great work. So thank you very, very much. And that's it. I think we're going to wrap up now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.